The Little Book of True Testimonies. Stories of answered prayers, the paranormal, and supernatural God encounters. Written by Keith B. Perrin. Narrated by Myron Abernathy and Barbara Fernandez. Chapter 1. My Introduction to the Supernatural. Keith P. Truth be told, I have always had a knowledge of God and the Bible since I was a child. My mother would read us Bible stories and pray with us before bed. She taught us to say grace at meals, so I had respect and a good foundation for basic biblical truths from day one. However, my personal journey with Christ started when I was around 11 or 12 years old. I didn't know it then, but God was drawing me to come closer to Him with a deep desire to pray and read the Bible. When I say read and pray, I mean staying inside almost a whole summer, not going outside and playing with friends, but instead praying, reading the Bible, and Bible story kids books, and asking God to use me and talk to me like He did the prophets Samuel, Joseph, Job, and Daniel. The more I read, the more excited I got hearing about this awesome God who created everything and who did miraculous signs and wonders. There is much more to this story, but to save time, I will get right to my first supernatural experience. One summer evening in 1981 or 82, we were watching a movie called The Bible, starring George C. Scott. I loved that movie, and I was fascinated by it. It was very hot, and my mother used to lay blankets on the floor in our apartment. When it was a hot night, she, my brother, and I would sleep on the floor under the air conditioning to stay cool. They were going to bed and shut the light off in the living room. I wanted to spend some more time alone with God, reading the Bible and praying before I went to bed. So, I went to the bedroom and started reading the Bible, and then a sudden chill hit me, coursing all over my body. I shivered and looked around, but continued reading. Suddenly, it happened again, and then a third time. Closing my Bible and scanning the room, I had an eerie feeling like I was being watched, like I was not alone. It felt evil and sinister, but I didn't see anything. Bowing my head and closing my eyes, I said, "Lord, I feel evil all around me, and it chills my blood." I remember it like it was today. At this point, I was faced with a dilemma. Should I run for the door, turn off the light switch, and then sprint into the dark living room to lie with my family, or sit still, frozen with fear? I was too afraid to move. So, I waited and got the courage to pray for God's protection. While praying, my heart was still racing. Hence, I sprinted for the door, turned off the light, bolted to the living room, leaped over my mom and brother, laid down, and covered my head with a blanket. It was pitch black, save for the sparse light bleeding through the curtains from a street light. I was trying to be quiet, but I was breathing heavily. I couldn't shake this unnatural fear that I was feeling. So slowly and cautiously, I peeked through the blanket to spy the living room. It was when I looked into the pitch black darkness of the kitchen that a cold dose of reality hit. Two sets of bright, shining red eyes were looking right at me from the darkness. I could not believe what I was seeing. I started to shake and tremble with fear. Was this real or imagined? Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. This can't be real, I thought to myself as I looked on in horror. I didn't want to wake my mom and brother, especially if I was just seeing things. So I gathered the courage to slowly, gingerly, and cautiously rise and creep over the top of them and inch my way over to the kitchen. The whole time, I was whispering prayers of safety to God, while still apprehensive of what I had seen, thinking this couldn't be real, and rubbing my eyes, making sure I was not seeing a mirage. When I approached nearer to the entrance of the kitchen, it happened. Those two glowing sets of eyes began to move in a circular fashion. Whatever heads they were attached to started to bob and move as a warning sign that I was getting too close. This was not an illusion. This was all too real. I took off like lightning and jumped over my family, repeatedly covering my head with the blanket. Shaking and crying silently with tears flowing, I tried to wake my mom, shaking her, then calling her name. My shakes became more aggressive, and I spoke louder so that she could wake up. "Wake up, Mom! Please wake up!" I begged until I realized she wasn't going to wake up. Neither of them were. This was my experience and mine alone to contend with. Prayers went up to God silently with tears flowing. I got the courage to look in the kitchen, and they were still there, looking at me. They weren't going anywhere. Suddenly, a realization hit. I had to trust God. I had to believe God and His Word, and I knew that He would deal with these creatures for me. So I began to pray under the covers, still shaking and crying, and hearing the snores of bliss from my family, unaware of the spiritual encounter taking place. Lord, please take them away. Jesus, please take them away, I cried and repeated for what seemed like an eternity. Peeking through the blankets, I saw that they were still there, so I began to pray more earnestly for a while, begging the Lord to dispatch these demons. But to no avail. Again, they were still there, staring at me in the silent darkness. Then I had had enough. Realizing I needed to fight in faith and believe what I was saying, I started to get angry and started commanding them to leave in Jesus' name. Still scared, but determined, I kept it up and got even bolder in my prayers, talking to God and telling Him that I trusted Him. Then I began to talk to the demons, telling them to get out of here. Jesus is Lord. After much spiritual warfare, although I didn't realize it at the time, I sensed inside myself that something was different in the air. Could it be they were gone? Nervous and shaking, afraid to peek out the covers, fearing their presence was still in the darkness, I slowly peeked through the covers. Gone. They were gone. All gone. I even got up and crept towards the kitchen, but didn't get too close. Peering into the blackness, I saw that they were all gone. Elated, I leaped over my family quietly, got under the covers, and began to thank and praise the Lord. I will never forget that experience. Not only did I find out through a test that the kingdom of darkness was very real and dangerous, but I also found that Jesus is even more real and more powerful. And He is the God of the Bible, the God who still answers prayers even today. 1 John chapter 3, verse 8. This has been the Little Book of True Testimonies, stories of answered prayers, the paranormal, and supernatural God encounters. Written by Keith Perrin. Narrated by Myron Abernathy and Barbara Fernandez.